In late 1944, the Allied command looked at the map of Europe and saw a war winding down. Soviet forces were closing in from the east, American and British troops were pushing from the west, and the consensus was clear. The German army was retreating, broken, and effectively out of resources. The numbers backed up that assessment. The German military machine was bleeding out on two fronts, suffering crippling shortages of able-bodied men and facing a petroleum deficit so severe that entire panzer divisions were reduced to moving on foot or with horse-drawn wagons. But Adolf Hitler refused to concede. Instead, he stripped the eastern and western fronts of whatever combat-ready units remained, gathering the absolute last of his elite SS panzer divisions to prepare one final, massive offensive. The objective of this planned rout was incredibly ambitious. The plan required German forces to punch directly through the dense Ardennes forest, race to capture the vital port city of Antwerp, and physically split the American and British armies in two. Facing an unwinnable war of attrition, this strategy was a pure wager. Hitler was taking his empire's entire remaining military bankroll and betting it all on a single, sudden shock, hoping to panic the Western Allies into signing a negotiated peace. To have any chance of succeeding, this operation required three specific conditions. First, absolute surprise, a thinly defended line, and most importantly, terrible weather. Because the Allies controlled the skies, the entire German advance depended completely on thick winter fog rolling into the forest. Without heavy cloud cover to ground the superior American and British bombers, the panzer columns would be wiped out before they ever reached Antwerp. On the morning of December 16th, the weather held, and the trap sprang. Roughly 200,000 German troops, backed by hundreds of tanks, slammed into a quiet 80-mile stretch of the American front. The divisions holding that sector were entirely unsuspecting. Many were exhausted veterans resting, or inexperienced replacements seeing their first combat. This map shows the immediate impact of the assault. The overwhelming force of the initial attack punched a deep indentation into the American defensive line, creating a massive bending perimeter that gave the battle its famous name, the Bulge. While the main front line gave way, individual American units refused to retreat. They quickly found themselves completely cut off, isolated behind enemy lines, and fighting in total confusion as the German army swept past them. The most critical stand took place at the crossroads town of Bastogne. Here, the surrounded 101st Airborne Division physically blocked the primary German advance route. When the German command demanded their surrender, the American general famously issued a single-word reply: nuts. That stubborn defense created a lethal bottleneck. By refusing to yield the crossroads, the Americans forced the German advance to burn through precious time and their highly limited fuel reserves, fatally compromising the entire timetable of the operation. Then, on December 23rd, the gamble finally broke. The thick winter clouds that had protected the German advance rolled away, and the skies cleared. The return of Allied air power was devastating and immediate. Swarms of fighter bombers descended on the forest, obliterating the German tank columns that were now completely stalled on icy roads, entirely starved of fuel. Simultaneously, General George Patton executed a staggering logistical maneuver. He wheeled his entire Third Army 90 degrees to the north, driving his forces straight through the freezing conditions to break the siege of Bastogne. Stripped of the element of surprise and exposed to constant bombing without any air cover of their own, the massive German offensive halted entirely, and the lines began to collapse inward. The math of Germany's supply shortage finally caught up with them. Because they were operating with virtually zero reserves, the moment their forward momentum stopped, their defeat became instantaneous and irreversible. The toll of the fighting in the freezing Ardennes was immense. American forces suffered roughly 89,000 total casualties, making it one of the bloodiest single engagements in United States military history. But for Germany, the cost was terminal. They suffered over 100,000 casualties and permanently lost their final, irreplaceable cache of tanks, aircraft, and fuel. Those losses dictated the rest of the war. After the battle ended, the German army was left with absolutely zero offensive capability on the Western Front. By pushing all his remaining chips to the center of the table and losing, Hitler stripped away his empire's last defensive shield. The desperate wager intended to save his regime only accelerated the total destruction of Nazi Germany.